Many of you know that I am the first woman mayor elected in Oakland, and I am the first Asian American mayor. We are historically a place of radical and progressive ideas. So my husband always reminds me about Curt Flood, free agency baseball for you baseball fans. Curt Flood's an Oakland kid. We were the home of the Pullman Porters, the first African-American union to be in the AFL-CIO. We, as I said, we're the home of Kaiser. When the anti-apartheid movement went worldwide, what sparked it is not only the young congressmen from Berkeley and Oakland, Ron Dellons, but the longshoremen closing down and refusing to unload products in South Africa. That boycott went international, played a critical role in stopping and ending apartheid. We're very proud of those. We, of course, have the Barbara Lee, my congresswoman, who was the only congressperson to vote against the funding for the Iraq War. And as we said then, she and I at those rallies, is that more kids will die on the streets of Oakland because of the Iraq War than will die in the fields of Iraq, probably because we're such an anti-war city. Very few kids join the military, but because of the schools that we didn't fund, because of the hospitals we didn't fund, because the investment in young people across America that we didn't fund, the homicides that we talk about, that City Unites talks about, is partly that, and it goes to Martin Luther King's discussion. And it's the part that's not often repeated when we do the I Have a Dream speech. We often don't talk about that check that came back funded with insufficient funds. He talks about the Bank of Justice, and that is what I want to talk about today. Oakland today is like most of the other cities. We have what Martin Luther King called in that speech, islands of poverty in oceans of prosperity. The Bay Area is leading the nation out of the recession. The high-tech industry is particularly doing that. Oakland, not so much. More in San Jose, more in San Francisco. That's one of the things that I'm trying to lead a civic discussion on. I was talking to the Google representative about a lot of young people like to live in Oakland because it's cool, it's hip. We went to Berkeley, we're Bears. We don't like to go to the other part of the Bay Area. But very few tech industries have invested in Oakland, where the office space is 50% less than San Francisco, and the BART ride is 15 minutes. I can get to Ed Lee's office in 15 minutes from my office. But there's this cultural divide. And so what's with that? We've got better weather, our housing is cheaper, our office space is cheaper, and as I said, the Boston Globe says our restaurants are better. So what's with that? What is that line where people will not invest in Oakland, and what can you do to turn it around? So right now, like many American cities, only 50% of African-American boys and brown boys are graduating from high school in Deep East Oakland. We call that Deep East Oakland. That's one of our islands of poverty. Last week, as I was getting ready for the mayor's summer job program, and I have tripled the number of summer jobs since I've become mayor in the last 3 years, and as a result, we don't have that summer spike of violence because I put most of those jobs in the toughest neighborhoods, and this year I'm trying for 2,000 jobs. But what we see is that the unemployment right now, the latest unemployment in my zip code, which is Middle Oakland near the Mormon Temple. How many of you have been to Oakland? Can I just see? Okay. Mormon Temple, Central Oakland, East Oakland Hills, right below the redwood trees. My neighborhood, the unemployment rate for young men from 18 to 25 is 4%. Not bad, actually really pretty good. In East Oakland, as it has been for decades, has been for the 50 years since the March on Washington, the unemployment rate is now 4 times, maybe 5 times the national average if the unemployment rate goes down to 6%. The unemployment rate for African American or anybody in that zip code in Deep East Oakland, which are mostly brown and black young men, is 35%. We're talking about 5 minutes away. Right. So, as mayor, one of the things that I said this year in the State of the Union, or the State of the City for us, is that we're coming at a time when, after World War II, we had this industrial investment, and then America disinvested in cities in many ways. It's not just Julius Wilson talking about the industrial jobs, and that's true. Oakland had industrial jobs, but we still have the Port of Oakland, and we've invested very hard in keeping good-paying blue-collar jobs in the city since I've been mayor. That's one of our strategies. But people also moved institutions out, and so we've created these islands of poverty and these oceans of prosperity, and we blame the people who are left behind. What's now happening in America, and this is the opportunity, this is 50 years after the March on Washington, an amazing opportunity where people are coming back to the cities. There's the gray tsunami of people who are like me, boomers, bought that house in the suburbs, and quite frankly, there are more things that happen in Oakland in a day than happen in their neighborhoods in a month. And they're coming back. They're getting rid of the 4-bedroom house, making a little profit and probably going off some worldwide trips in between with the difference. And they're buying condos in Oakland along the BART station for the time when our kids won't let us drive our cars anymore. And for Californians, that's very, very hard, right? But when we're just gonna be, like even I'm looking for a nice little condo near the lake in between Chinatown and Lake. I can have some in the morning. I can walk Lake Merritt, which is gorgeous. And when I'm maybe 90 or so when they won't let me drive anymore, and still be able to zip around the Bay Area on really great public transportation, because Oakland is in the heart of, we're the only one where all the BART trains go through. We're in the heart of the Bay Area, and the population's moving east. So I will be right in the heart of everything in the Bay Area when I'm 90. Now that people want to move back, and then the hipsters and the artists, is why Oakland has this amazing thing called First Friday, where 10,000 people of all ages, colors, and whatever come down to the art galleries and the street fair. It's a little like Mardi Gras meets St. Mark's Square, where you have artists, you have bands on every block, where 10 to 20,000 people in the summer come out and hang out, rich and poor, people who speak in 130 languages, just out having a good time on the streets of Oakland. It's an amazing opportunity for us to know what the future looks like and for the world to come together and see what we can be. So that happens in Oakland every month. And what's important about that is I use that as a social barometer of how socially integrated you are. So when I'm at the Oakland Hills and I'm doing a house party or doing a meeting, I ask how many of you have been to First Friday. Now, maybe it used to be 10%, maybe now a third. If I'm in the Flatlands or if I'm down with young people, almost everybody has been to First Friday. And so it's a question of, are we willing to come to our downtown? Are we willing to take it back? Somebody earlier talked about taking back the parks. I just want to take back downtown. And downtown's a very, very, very hot place now. And that's where we are. So now that people want to come and move in Oakland, and Oakland is one of those places that was underinvested, how do we make sure that there's not, quote unquote, the evil word, and the major word of discussion for urban mayors right now is gentrification? How can you make sure that the people who stayed in those cities, who built those cities, and have been there all along don't get pushed out? And that, as we as mayors have to start that discussion. I've announced the former, 2 mayors ago, Jerry Brown, who's now the governor, had a 10K to bring young people downtown. He didn't build schools, he didn't build parks. He said, oh, they're not gonna have kids. I said, Jerry, they're eventually gonna have kids. So women council members, we put in the schools, we put in the parks. But we also put in 25% affordable housing. And so now, Oakland is one of the leading green cities in the country. We are going to build houses along our transportation corridors at our 5 BART stations. We are going to build a very, very green city of the future. And we're going to try to build in affordability. Those are part of the policy issues that we have to take on just to make sure that our cities are equitable and they are cities for everybody. But more importantly, I want to end with this. More importantly, we know, I'm a former school board member. I chaired the Council of Urban Boards of Education. We have known for a long time what it takes to get kids to equity despite their background, we see what happened in the Harlan Kid Zone. It's an issue of money and it's an issue of people. When I became mayor, I asked 2,000 people to step up. They become mentors with what I call the city's toughest kids, the 500 kids that we arrest every year, the 300 kids that age out of foster care, and the 1,200 kids who are missing 20 days of school. Because as a former school board member, I know that they're not going to graduate from high school, and that 2/3 of them will be in trouble with the law when they're in high school if I don't get them to start going to school. And we can take a step backwards. We're doing a citywide project, and I'm starting with the city. I'm asking every department to find a way to volunteer in the schools. We're going to try to get all our kids to read at grade level by 3rd grade. We're working with the school district for universal preschool. Whether it's Cities United or when the president brought 18 of us together to ask what can we do about violence in our cities, we all talked about these things. We all know if we can get universal preschool, if we can get real support for families, and if we can get investment in our cities, that we can do it. But that means we have to get investment in our cities. So that means I need to ask Google to stop. I spend a lot of time so that when their buses, their charter buses that take people over to the peninsula don't get picketed by the Occupy people. I'd rather than have a plant in Oakland because these people already live in Oakland, and then maybe more minority kids could get hired into the tech industry, which is terribly still underrepresented by minority children, particularly black and brown young people. And we need to say that we actually know this, that people have to invest in the cities. It is a shame that to get the housing market to go in Oakland, I'm not ashamed of it, but when I really thought about it, that I had to go to China to get the largest housing project going. I had to get an investor, the largest Chinese investor in US history, to fund 3,000 homes in the hottest housing market in the country when the banks were sitting on top of $7 trillion is what the president says. I'll just take his stat. We're sitting on this money and not reinvesting in cities. In a market like Oakland, the Bay Area, where housing is pretty much a sure deal. And so that nobody moved until the Chinese invested. And so, what is it about the corporate world and how they look at cities? And then lastly, what is it that we as Americans are going to do, not just the people who live in Oakland, but the people in the whole Bay Area? If Oakland has a third, most of the children who live in poverty, I would say be Richmond, East Palo Alto, and Oakland, we have the children who live in poverty, then we need to develop regional programs to support those children, that give those kids an equal opportunity. Because as Martin Luther King said, and actually Nelson Mandela said this too, there's no peace without justice. I can't believe that the Bank of Justice is bankrupt, what he said. So it's 50 years later, America. We know what we can do. We know there are things that work. The Cities United are this summer really going to make an attempt to get as many summer jobs as we need, particularly for young men of color in the neighborhoods where the unemployment rate is 4 and 5 times the national average. We can do this. This is quantifiable. It really doesn't need a lot of debate, but the question is, will we have the moral, political courage to talk to the people who have the money and the powers to be, and not have, in the Bay Area, I love San Francisco. It's probably the only city that didn't get hit during the recession. We can't have cities of wealth or seas of prosperity and allow some children in some cities to be in these islands of desperation. Reread the Martin Luther King speech on the March on Washington. He saw that then. If he were here today, he would still see that again. We can do better. We can't afford to give up on any kid. We have to make sure that we all rise together and make sure that the bank finally cashes the check for every American child. Thank you.